Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our discussion tonight, too. It's so great to have you all here. My name is Shekar Krishnan, and I'm running for City Council here in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, Queens. And this week's discussion is one that is really important to us as a community and throughout New York City, one that must get far more attention by our city too. And we're joined by panelists who have really done such amazing work around the issues of advocating for seniors in our city and in our communities too. And the first thing to say up front is seniors are such a precious and powerful force in our neighborhoods too. But the biggest problem we've had is the way in which New York City has not done enough to actually provide services and resources for our seniors. Whether it's far more accessible public transportation or improving Access-a-Ride, whether it's senior housing and making sure senior housing is accessible, and there's far more of it in our city and our neighborhoods too, or whether it's making sure that we have culturally accessible senior centers, especially for our immigrant seniors too, who are looking for a place where they can come together with their peers and neighbors and friends and spend time and socialize too. Or whether it's making sure that we've got enough in the way of legal services and resources, especially for seniors trying to navigate the immense bureaucracy of applying for public benefits, whether it's SCREE, the Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption, or DRE, Disability Rent Increase Exemption, ways to basically freeze and protect your rights as tenants and as seniors in housing. There are so many issues affecting seniors in our city today, and so much more the city can be doing. And that's why we thought it was important to have this discussion to really talk about these issues from the standpoint of what we could do better in New York City for our senior communities as well. So we also released just recently too our 5-point summary plan on fighting for seniors. You can check out our whole senior platform on our website at www.voteshekar.com. But we also have our 5-point plan up as well, that please check out on social media as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce our two excellent panelists tonight. We have Bill Meehan, who is himself a senior, a longtime community activist here in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, and on all different issues from housing to, of course, LGBTQIA+ issues as well. He's also the resident of Stonewall House, which is the first LGBTQIA+ friendly senior housing complex in New York City. We also have Kevin Cho, who is the assistant director at Korean Community Services, which has done such great work throughout Queens, from Bayside to Corona, in establishing senior centers in our communities, especially immigrant senior centers for our Korean American community. So without further ado, thank you both for joining. And I want to get started. We'll have some questions and discussion that we'll be doing, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for questions as well that you can put in the chat too. So just as an initial matter, Bill, why don't you tell us a bit about, we've had many conversations over the years about when it comes to senior housing and protecting rights of seniors. You now live in Stonewall House, which we need far more senior housing, and especially LGBTQIA+ senior housing in our city, but Stonewall is the only one right now too. Can you give us a sense, as a senior yourself too, about what are the major issues facing seniors today? And maybe in particular, talking about why is it so important to have senior housing in our city? And you can talk about your own experience at Stonewall House too.
Right, thank you, Shekar. I think housing is an issue that, no matter what your age, is a major issue in life, and it's one of those things that you really can't do much else if you don't have a satisfactory housing situation for yourself, not secure. It's hard to be involved in anything else if you're constantly worrying about whether you're going to have a roof over your head in the following month. I think senior housing, we need to do two things, I think. Excuse me, we need to do two things. One of them is we have to realize that in timelines, seniors don't have a lot of times in the future. So seniors need a lot of immediacy. Long-term projects for seniors are nice on paper, and maybe those behind us will be able to enjoy it. But seniors now need short-term solutions. I say that because I live in a beautiful building. It took 3 years for this building to be complete. It took a huge amount of work on going through a lottery and getting people into this and stuff like that. A long waiting list. And at the end of the day, 142 units opened up. We'll talk a little bit about something about the building in a minute, but I I think the immediate type of thing is not so much building new buildings, although they're nice, all right? And for politicians have a little disease called an edifice complex. They like to build buildings and have their names hang on the top of it. And that's all very nice in the future for you. But for right now, I think the most important thing about senior housing is immediate. How do we do that? We have scree, we have drape. Neither is a complete solution. And I think it's a realization that is much easier and much cheaper. Okay, for those that don't want to do it for the moral reason, for the economic reason, it's much cheaper to keep seniors in place. And you can do that by taking some of the things that we have here. I'm in a Section 8 situation. And that Section 8 situation can be applied to someone in a regular apartment house, a regular different way of living, and that would keep the person in this community. And that's a very important point. For seniors to move is a very difficult thing. Many people have difficulty simply with change in television program. And the idea of moving from a very familiar space to a place they're not familiar with is a major traumatic experience for many, and an experience that they really can't handle well. So keeping seniors in place is an important thing, and it's a very easy thing to do if we simply expand the use of Section 8. And I think the second thing we want to look at when seniors is that seniors are not a burden to the community. While it's important for seniors to be supported by the community, seniors can add an awful lot to the community. They bring with them history, they bring with them a charism of having survived many different things, and they can share talents, they can share career information, they can share intergenerational type of things. They come with a lot, not just baggage, they come with a lot of gifts to offer the community. And I think that's an important realization.
Thank you very much, Bill, for making that point too, because I think it bears repeating how important, and as I said before, powerful of a force seniors are in our community too, and must be seen that way as well. And I think you mentioned some great points about how housing is connected to every other crisis in our city too, and really is an issue that all demographics, all ages are fighting for to ensure that we have, and actually housing is treated as a human right too. I want to come back to you in a minute too, because I have some questions on some of the points that you mentioned that we can follow up on. But I also want to take a minute to welcome Kevin too, to say a few words as well. Bill touched on a bunch of different points, but one of the things that he mentioned too was the way in which, when it comes to not just housing, but having space for seniors to come together, and especially making our services culturally and linguistically accessible for immigrant seniors who can, on top of having an immensely difficult time applying for benefits and navigating a bureaucracy in city government that is oftentimes not centering language justice. Can you talk a bit about the importance of senior centers for our immigrant communities? Why are they such a crucial place? And what benefits can they offer for immigrant communities in particular?
Sure. Thanks, Shekar, for inviting me to this space, and for me, just giving me the opportunity for me to share my experience. And by no means, I'm no professional or an expert in this matter. And when we talk about seniors, there's so many angles and lenses that we can really approach this. But I just wanted to, going back to your question and point, I was raised by my grandparents for the first 15 years when we immigrated from South Korea. So if it wasn't for them, I really don't know who, my caretakers would have been. So I know firsthand the experience of having to navigate and calling these institutions and agencies for my grandparents, for my parents, trying to navigate as immigrants due to the language barriers that we face growing up. And it's actually interesting that you mentioned sort of the diversity that especially that we see in New York City, but I wanted to quickly point to a 2017 report by the Center for Urban Future titled The Aging Apple, where they really talk about how today the vast majority of seniors are not just from Europe anymore, right? They consist from Latin America, Caribbean, from Asia, which really shows that there's an increasing number of immigrants and people of color who are seniors. And what that means is that it really changes the way we got to deliver our services and how we tailor them to be culturally and linguistically sensitive. And going back to the senior centers, I think senior centers really provide and solve a different issues when it comes to socialization, place where they can really come together and build camaraderie, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to sort of the programs and the accessibility to resources that are available at senior centers. During this pandemic, I like to focus on two main perspectives, which is food insecurity and mental health. And, for example, at KCS, we operate two big senior centers in Flushing as well as Corona, where pre-pandemic, we had about, I would say, given like 800 seniors on a daily basis, wow, where they had meals provided, where they had programs, dance classes, so many varieties of programs, but that all had to be shut down. And when these things disappeared, we saw how important these services were and how important these senior centers are. Even though our senior centers catered the vastly Korean Americans and the wider Asian Americans, I'm sure there are other senior centers out there that had to close and where seniors didn't know where to go to afterwards, right? So I think senior centers play a huge role, and it was whether we do Meals on Wheels, we had to find alternatives to provide these new services. And given how sort of the diversity we have in our population now, I think it's super crucial that these services are linguistically and just culturally sensitive. And I think that's like the key point there that I would like to sort of focus on. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did an excellent job answering and raised a lot of important points about the kinds of services too at senior centers and why they're so important for immigrant communities in particular. And Bill, just to go back to you for a second, some of the things that you talked about too, I want to stay on one point in particular, which was about, you mentioned benefits like SCREE, entry, and things like that. And I just, would love to hear you. I know you lived in rent stabilized housing before as well. What is it like, or how important is it to ensure that we have resources and legal services for seniors to help seniors apply for some of these benefits too? Like, I just wonder, how, from your own perspective, from all the community advocacy and work that you've done too, how easy of a process is it to apply for some of these benefits that could help so many seniors? And how important is it to have resources to help seniors in doing so?
Well, like any form, if it's something you haven't done before, it's not an easy thing. And that's where a council member comes in, because their office is very good at helping people sit down and fill a form out. The form itself is not that difficult. What was difficult when I first moved to Jackson Heights, SCREE was capped at $29,000. So if you made anything more than $29,000, you weren't eligible for SCREE. Now it's up to $50,000. But the important thing to understand with SCREE, whatever the number is, most seniors, their income remains stable. They might get a cost of living a little bit here or a little bit there, but basically their income remains stable. Nothing else in their life remains stable. Health, expenses in the food areas and restaurants and everything else. So every year as a senior, you get a little bit poorer and poorer and poorer. So you really need to have some ways of capping expenses. Yep. And DRE and SCREE are ways of doing that. A lot of this is state stuff. It's not something the city can fix easily, but part of the job, I think, of a council person is working with state to see that services and whatever roadblocks there are to services are eliminated. And that's where the office comes in and helping to people get them to fill out forms and stuff like that.
I think that's right. And I think that, it goes to a larger issue of the way in our city too, public benefits are so inaccessible for so many communities, right? Whether it's our low income, immigrant communities, our senior communities too. So I thought it was important to mention that as well. Can you talk a little bit, Bill, also about Stonewall House as well? And we talk about, senior affordable housing too. What was so historic about Stonewall House, and what need is it addressing, and how much more do we need to do to address that need as well?
Well, I think there's a couple of things about Stonewall House that I really love. First of all, moving from Jackson Heights to Brooklyn was a very difficult thing for me to do.
We miss you
I'm
here.
from Brooklyn. I was born in Brooklyn. I was raised in Brooklyn. I love Brooklyn, but Jackson Heights was home, and it was very difficult. And one of the things that really attracted me to Jackson Heights was its diversity. And I think one of the things about Stonewall House that has really made my transition easier is the fact that we are a model of diversity also. In Stonewall House, we have several different communities. While it's a gay, lesbian-centered building, the gay population is the most in the minority. We have a large population of formerly homeless people. We have a large population of NYCHA seniors who are looking for senior housing and move from NYCHA into here. We have we have maybe about 30 people in the Chinese community. We have one Korean couple. We have, I have a Polish neighbor. So we have, linguistically, we have difficulties at times. I'm gonna get hold of Kevin afterwards to get some translation from my Korean family. Stephen Wong has been helping us with some of the Chinese families. But we have a diversity that we're living with. And with that diversity comes difficulty in programming because, again, cultural needs need to be attended to. Not everyone has the same idea what they would like to do with space. We have a beautiful community center. No one has seen the inside of it because we moved here and within a week or two, masks went on and everything closed down. So our community center is simply very nicely accumulating dust and it's a beacon of hope. Hopefully we'll be able to use it soon.
Thanks, Bill. And I think that, that's such an important point. Like I said before, too, one of our biggest issues is how much we need to expand housing like Stonewall houses in our city. And it's the first of its kind. It's historic in that sense, too. But of course, the inclusivity, the diversity, and all the population served who have such high needs for affordable housing, too. It's historic, but of course, something that we need to build on more than ever at this point, too.
If I could just add one thing to that, and that's the
Sure.
affordability of it. So much of senior housing, my battery is going down, let me just plug in. So much
Sure.
of senior housing, they use an AMI that enables people earning up to maybe $160,000 to qualify for senior housing. Many of the senior housing projects that go up as advertised as seniors, when you look at the pricing of it, a studio is $1,900, a one bedroom is $2,100 through $2,300, pricing that most seniors cannot afford. In Stonewall House, we use a wonderful model, and it was introduced in Congress as a Fair Rent Act about 5 years ago by Kamala Harris and by Joe Crowley. And rent here is 30% of income. Whether you have a studio or one bedroom, 30% of your income goes to rent. And again, that's a capped number. So your rent is not going to go up on a regular basis. You might get a little notch up and down a little bit, but nothing major. And it's truly affordable. Some of the housing that I looked at before coming here was, had everything you wanted as a senior. It was a secure building, it had cultural advantages, it had nice community rooms and stuff, but paying the rent would have been a difficult type of thing. Here again, having the capacity to know that rent is not going to be an issue is a major, major gain.
That's right. And I think that, that's one of the, capping the rent at 30% of income is actually a standard of how rent burdened you can be. Above 30%, which actually so many New Yorkers are, it's considered rent burdened in New York City. And it's actually, given the number of New Yorkers that are rent burdened, it, in some ways it just shows how expensive housing has become in New York too. But I couldn't agree with you more. And in some ways, I also think that, we need to also have make benefits even larger to ensure that tenants can stay in their homes too, because a lot of times the benefits are tied to standards that are very outdated as well. Kevin, I'd love to hear from you a bit more about senior centers in particular too. You mentioned how important it is for immigrant communities. What are some of the challenges of establishing senior centers in communities that you all have found? How have you navigated those?
Yeah, and before I answer that question, I actually wanted to add on to Bill about reaching out to your local electeds. I think that's super important. And I feel like a lot of people are not aware that they can actually reach out to their local electeds in a city, state level. And, I personally worked as a community liaison working on constituent services for about 2 years. And, a lot of folks don't know about it until they do actually call and be like, hey, how do you help? Can you help me with XYZ applications and or provide me with XYZ services? And I'm like, sure, and please let your neighbors know. So I think one of the things that we need to do is not just as CBOs and et cetera, but just generally, I think we really need to work more closely with our local elected officials. And it's also a way to keep them accountable, right? To make sure that they're doing the job as well.
Absolutely.
And just going back to your question about the senior center, I think I personally did not know how difficult it is to run one. I think through this pandemic, I was actually able to learn a lot more about the processes and what goes into running a senior center, and also the importance of a senior center in a community, right? But the biggest thing about senior centers is run by funding, and whether that's through Department of Aging or any other city state funding, you really need funding to do the job, and that was the hard part, getting that funding, because the fact and the reality is that right now our senior population is growing, but I think the level of investment that is going into our senior population is not matching, right? And that's the disparity that's causing in the gap. Right. So how do we, I'm not sure what the exact numbers are, and I'd love to provide you with another opportunity, but there's a clear disparity that shows that that the senior populations are not just getting the enough investment, or allocation of these fundings. And I think that's where we really need to step up to do that. And because the fact is, the statistics and the studies are showing that the populations are growing too. So whether, for example, like our program, like for example, our senior center has been around since, I would say 1985, ever since 1985, we've been providing all these meals, all these services for our community, providing them the space. But one of our biggest program is the home delivered meals, which we do. And where we actually go to door to seniors who are not able to physically come out themselves, and we provide them with hot meals. And and I've done a few of those myself, and it's such an incredible sort of experience. And it shows that, in the micro sense, how much these services are needed, right? So again, this you can't, like, it's impossible for one organization to tackle everything. And nor can a single senior center really do that. But I think that the goal here is that we try our best to do and cater to our seniors. And like I said, when I think about seniors, it goes back to my grandparents. Rest in peace. They're not here with us anymore. But I just can't think about like all these type of services that they might not have needed. And even though KCS, we originally started out as tailoring our services to Korean American community, we're at a point where it's really open to the community, city, to the entire community, really, right? Our office is located citywide, so I think it's crucial that not as only is it our job to tap into them and reach out, but also that we really do try our best to bring people who need the services, but the unique thing about us is that we also provide the cultural and sort of the linguistic sort of sensitivity around it as well. We have staff who are bilingual and et cetera, and who understands the culture. So that's another key sort of highlight. Yeah.
And, Kevin, on that point too, one, thing I wanted to ask about as well is how, in particular, during COVID, you mentioned it before too, but when it came to, home delivery, meals in your program for seniors, how was that affected by COVID? And how did you ensure, because one of the big things that we saw too was, particularly for meal delivery programs in the city during COVID, they weren't always the most culturally accessible in the food that was being served and culturally appropriate. So how did you all ensure, how do you ensure when you have programs like that, and especially how was it impacted during COVID, and how to ensure that the food itself is food that the seniors they're used to from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that was the big challenge and the homework, and sort of like the rapid strategy that we sort of needed at the instant moment. When our senior center and our adult daycare center that closed down, we have seniors that really depend on our congregate meals, and not only that, the job loss and the economic sort of insecurity for our seniors, it also translated into their caregivers, the caregivers who are losing their jobs. So they can't take care of seniors, right? And this sort of also leads to the fact that due to the low English proficiency in our community, it goes back to our initial conversation where there's difficulty in accessing government relief and benefits. When you ask yourself, when we ask ourselves, why do you go to some, this senior center over another one, is because, for folks who can speak English, they could really go anywhere they want, to be honest, because they speak the language. But these seniors can't, they can't. That's why we need senior centers that do cater to specific ethnic cultures and et cetera, right? And just going back to what did we did as specific as KCS, the first thing that we sort of did was, all right, what do we need to do? We expanded our meal services to seniors in Manhattan too, through special partnerships with restaurants, with other CBOs, through governments. We have a public health and research department, which is our public health department in short. Really, we partnered with the local Elmis Hospital to provide food and nutrition referrals for low-income patients, many of whom also tested for COVID positive. So we really tried our best to tap into our networks, our community partners, allies, faith partners, right? Individual donors, to really make sure that we are able to provide all these services that we were able to do before as normal as we can, despite our limitations that we faced. Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that, Kevin, too. And I want to open it up. I see some questions already coming in, so I want to make sure that we get to those questions too. So the first one is I see from Lena, which goes to both Kevin and Bill, which is, can you both talk more about the mental health issues specific to seniors and how we as a city can better support when it comes to services and resources?
All right, I'll just maybe start with that. Mental health has been an issue hidden in many families and many communities forever. Mm-hmm. And the fact that seniors might have mental health problems is one of the taboos that people don't like to admit to. So I think that's one of the first things is to understand that problems exist. And one of the problems that exists that needs to be addressed is the normalcy of having problems. And that once you can admit to that, then you can reach out for help. We have some tenants here in the building who are in need of some kind of help. And we're looking for a way of training individuals in the community to sort of become partners with them, not to do therapy with them, not to offer them, psychiatric or psychology, but simply to be in a friendly mode and to sort of direct them to other services as needed, to be sort of a bridge between the unknown therapist and their friend that is recommending them. So that's one thing that needs to be done. I think, seniors go through things that everyone goes through, but probably more in an accelerated rate. COVID took so many people, and in the senior community, so many seniors were among those numbers. High numbers of seniors died. Seniors have a difficult time replacing people in their lives. They have a difficult time making new friends. And those can bring on issues of isolation, issues of depression. It's a situation that could be a time bomb unless it's addressed. And so, as I say, the most important thing, I think, is bringing it out into the open, that we all have problems. Leaders identifying that they have a problem. I think that's important. And then having services that are user-friendly, that don't have a stigma attached to it. You know, you can go and you can wear a button saying I voted today or I gave blood, but you never see anyone writing I got therapy today. You know, and we don't need buttons. We need to know that this is just part of normal life, and at times we're going to need to sit down and talk to someone, and hopefully there'll be someone there for us.
Well said, Bill. Kevin?
Sure. Yeah, I see a lot of folks raising their hands, so I just wanted to. I'll make this really short. But you know, mental health, it's nothing new, like Bill said. It's been around pre-pandemic. It's all around us. It's just that it's one of those illnesses that we just can't see, you know. But this pandemic definitely posed or exacerbated that issue and those problems. And especially given our senior population, this was another area where we really had to sit down and think about, like, what do we do? You know, what do we do? How do we reach out to our seniors? Because like Bill said, these prolonged isolations can lead to depression and other mental illnesses, and that's a fact, right? And, you know, KCS, we're actually one of the first state licensed Korean American nonprofit in New York City to have gotten a mental health license to operate. And our team really acted fast. We transitioned to mental health services, which is a new, term that we started using, right? And that alone imposed a lot of challenge because of the sort of the technology limitations that we faced. And not only that, when you work with mental health, there's so many HIPAA violations and all these things that we have to worry about. We just didn't know how that could work. But eventually we found a way where we did our best to reach out to our clients, still continue these mental health services. But what I really like to give kudos to my team and staff and volunteers is that they actually went out to some of these homes, obviously with like full like COVID procedures and safety measures in place, where sometimes it was literally like maybe that seniors will be behind the door and we'll be like by the doorstep, just talking and checking in, So it was whatever we could do. It was home visits. It was through, we taught seniors how to use their video cam through different instant messaging apps that we use. Like for Koreans, we use KakaoTalk, which is a very huge platform for Koreans. So we were trying to be creative. We really had to be creative. We had to think outside of the box, right? And also, again, tap into our sort of networks and colleagues and professionals to get their advice about what are the best ways to do this. So it was definitely challenging, but we did what we could actually. And I think the biggest thing was when I saw our team really going out there and we had pictures, it was actually really moving, and like just to see how happy these seniors were, because these folks used to come into our centers every day, but all of a sudden there's no access to that, so that's a crazy thing, but yeah, we tried. Yeah.
Well, I think both of you make such great points about the way in which our city needs to reorient itself to fund so much more mental health services and resources, and to really eliminate the stigma around, as you said, Bill, talking about and recognizing mental health as something that's so important for everyone to be receiving services for, to talk about openly and not feel like it's something that they have to hide, which is very true, as you mentioned, really in all communities, but especially in immigrant communities, especially even among, immigrant seniors too. So I'm glad you both mentioned that point. I know, Karen, you have a question too. If you don't mind putting in the chat as well, just type it in because there's a bunch of questions here I want to get through. So just if you can type it in at one point.
Put it in the chat.
Oh, sure.
It's in the chat too.
Oh, it is? Okay. We didn't get it. I don't think we got it. Make sure to send it to everyone.
Yeah, I see your question. It's there.
Okay.
Centers, it's 6. Yeah.
Okay, I'll look for it. But I just want, in the meantime, as I look for it, one other question that came in earlier too was, maybe Bill, you can speak to this point too. How can we make life better for Norks, or naturally occurring retirement communities? Here in Jackson Heights, there are several buildings and communities that are now home to a majority senior residents known as Norks, but some don't have ADA compliant elevators. They have stairs at entryways. The streets are busy. What more can be done to protect them?
Lots. Uh, Stairs and elevators are not just problems in Norks. Most of our city subways do not have stairs and elevators and escalators and are not ADA compliant. A Nork, for everyone that doesn't know, is a naturally occurring retirement community. And the ones we have in Jackson Heights basically are vertical Norks. They're based in a building or a set of buildings, Northridge and Southridge. All right. I think one of the things that we need to do is understand that seniors, especially in areas like Jackson Heights, and I guess throughout the city pretty much the same, live scattered. And so we need to have horizontal Norks, area Norks, maybe in Jackson Heights, maybe from 69th Street up to 73rd Street. That area there would have a Nork. And what that would do would localize services. It would localize, it would identify needs in that particular community. It would have access, if not their own mental health people, it would have access to for referrals. It would be a smaller version of a community center, not walled in, but simply bringing services out. In Diversity Plaza, where Shekar and I both have done work, one of the things we were tasked with this COVID time was, in the past, we had to bring people into the plaza. Now we had to bring the plaza out to people. And that's what a Nork does, basically. It brings services to those in need. And so I think one of the easiest things to do would be to look at some of the models. In Boston, there's one. I believe in Connecticut, there's one. Washington, D.C. has horizontal Norks. And they can very easily be, there's no concrete involved in it. You know, it's a very easy type of thing to initiate. And I think that's something the city has to look at.
That's a very good point, Bill. And I think just on the point of accessibility, you know, you're right. It's so true when it comes to our public transportation system, when it comes to, you know, just so many public facilities, the way in which they're simply inaccessible for seniors, for parents of young children with strollers. How many times I've had to myself carry up the stroller up the flights of stairs on 82nd Street and Roosevelt, the 7 train too, just gives you a sense of how much work we have to do to make our city far more accessible for seniors, for individuals with disabilities, for parents with young children as well. And how many cases that, you know, my colleagues and I have represented fair housing cases where an elevator breaks down in a building and the landlord uses that as a tool of harassment to, for example, to ensure that seniors aren't able to actually get out of their apartments and can't go downstairs, doesn't build any reasonable accommodations, doesn't do anything, but uses it as a tool of harassment. And that's a violation, obviously, of the fair housing laws, but it happens far, far too often. I found, for some reason, Karen's question didn't appear on my computer, but I do have it here. And Karen's question was, any news when the city will reopen physical plans for senior centers? What will be the requirements for retrofitting the buildings for COVID safety? Kevin, do you have any insight on that?
That is a great question, and that is a very hard question as well. Unfortunately, I do not have the answers to that. But you know, we are looking into it. We'll need to work with the city to make sure that we follow the city standards, the health standards, and all of that. But I think the biggest thing right now the city's trying to do is first get folks vaccinated. And, you know, one of the things that we're doing, you know, KCS, we've been a vaccine site. It will be open until the end of, June or a little longer, September, I believe. But, you know, I think right now the city wants to focus on making sure that folks are vaccinated and then slowly reopen things. But to be honest, given how vulnerable seniors are, I don't know if we can ever go back to pre-pandemic, you know, level activity. You know, the way things are laid out, the design, the structure will need to be all changed. And I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation, to be honest. And this is it'll look very different. But, you know, like I said, I think I cannot stress the importance of senior center. So we are going to have to do our best to make sure that we try to keep it going and open it up as soon as possible. But that's safe, you know, but we can't just open up once it's safe, right?
Definitely.
Go ahead,
I saw one question in there about age. When do you become a senior? And I guess that's one of those really non-definable type of things. When I was a kid, my parents turned 30. And I thought that was so old. I figured they would die that year, you know. I am now on the 42nd iteration of my 27th birthday. So I think age is something, it's a number, and
Exactly, it's the number.
it's what you make of it and how you let it hem you in, or give you freedom to be who you are, you know?
Just to jump in, for KCS, I think we start accepting folks who are 62 and older, 62 or older.
62 is the age
that we look
entry
at.
here also.
Mhm.
50 for AARP, 62, 65 for Social Security, 62 for early Social Security. There's a whole bunch of benchmarks and stuff, you know.
But that's just a number. Age is just a number, as we said.
Just a number.
Exactly.
Millie, you had a good question too about whatever happened to the buddy system for seniors. Has that been something that we can revive again, or what is the status of that?
Bill, do you?
Okay, I think there's when I first moved in here, it was right at the beginning of COVID. And so it was a new neighborhood, and I had a portable kitchen in Jackson Heights. It was called Ricky's, and I ate there for all my meals pretty much. And so all of a sudden I was cooking for myself again, and there was no food. You go to a supermarket, there was nothing. There was nothing to buy. There was empty shelves and stuff like this. And I found a group of people online that shopped for me. And it was a group of young professionals who started working like this during COVID. And they became very much interested in the building, and they did a lot of shopping for us. The COVID virus, as much as it hurt us, has brought out a tremendous amount of vitality in the city, a tremendous amount of volunteerism in the city. It's shown that New York has a big heart. And there are a lot of people who are bringing food into us. Too much time, at times too many people are bringing food in that we have to sort of give stuff back. But I think, services like that, we have a service for telephone service where Sage will call gay seniors on a weekly basis. It used to be a visit, but now it's a phone call. In our building, we have gays and non-gays. So we're one community, which is a local community service group. They're doing telephone services with our people. And when they came to me about that, I said, that's a wonderful idea, but I want to be able to give you some people to make phone calls to other seniors. I want us to be in a place that needs services, but has the sense of being able to offer services. So I think, again, achieving that balance of receiving and giving is a very important thing.
Yeah,
absolutely. Go ahead,
just
Kevin.
to quickly chime on that, I agree. I totally agree with Bill, and I really appreciate that question that the audience asked about the buddy system, because I know that's been used elsewhere, and I've seen that happen. And we use the telephone buddy system at KCS as well, with certain limitations. But I've definitely seen that helping and working. So I think, stuff like this is going to be the new norm, in my opinion. So it's like taking these, it goes back to, again, like these creative ideas, thinking outside of the box and applying it. And I think if it works, like, why not keep it and continue doing so? Because it's definitely been helping, and especially that telephone buddy system that Bill talked about.
And I also want to talk about one of the biggest issues that's come up a lot too is the way in which Access-a-Ride is a service that can be far more improved in our city as well. Whether it's not punctual at all or doesn't come at all. There's so many things that we hear about concerns and issues with Access-a-Ride. I'd love to hear from one of you too, or what are the issues with Access-a-Ride right now, and how do we improve public transit in our city for everyone?
Well, Access-a-Ride is extremely expensive. And with all the expenses that go into it, it is not very reliable, and it is not very serviceable. One of the complaints I get constantly as a tenant organizer is we have to wait so long for the cab to come, for someone to come to pick us up. I think one of the ways of doing this, again, it's a bureaucracy. And so you need a bureaucrat to do it. And vouchers vouchers are beginning to be used, so you can use Lyft and you can use Uber or whatever to get that. What would have to be done as new cabs came online and stuff like that, we had to make sure that they were accessible. Many of the cabs today are difficult to get in and out of, even if you're not disabled. It's just difficult to step up and step down and stuff like that. So I think looking at taking Accessoride away from being an independent entity to maybe, again, being a service provider would help a great deal. And would cut down on the waiting, would use, and it would also give some of the gig industries, gig workers, income. So again, it would push money around again, which is important, you know, and I think it would work better for us.
Kevin, do you have anything?
You know, it's funny because this was the issues with Accessoride was there even when I was working as constituent services. We will get tons of complaints about this, and it's such a hard issue to solve because it goes down to funding, it goes down to the changing of the infrastructure and all of that. But it's sort of, you know, in my opinion, it's set up in a way where it doesn't make people want to take it, like the seniors take it, because it's so bad. You know, like whether the service, the equipment, sometimes the danger, the safety issues that involve even getting on and off that thing, you know, it's actually pretty big, and I don't think, you know, the city is doing enough to really look into this, in my opinion. So I think, you know, one thing that seniors should really do is reach out to their local elected officials and really constantly bring up this issue of Accessoride, because it's there, but people aren't using it for X amount of reasons, and trust me, I've always heard these complaints, but I rarely saw these issues get resolved. And I know, you know, maybe the city is trying, but the results sometimes doesn't show maybe quickly or just throughout the city. So we'll have to see about that.
And, you know, I also, that's a, you know, good point. I mean, there's so much work that needs to be done there too, frankly, and it's part of our larger, you know, issues of transportation. There's a couple more questions I want to get to as well. I think, you know, Cassandra makes a good point as well that I wanted to raise too, which is that there's many seniors who don't use senior centers and who, you know, are, you know, they may not even need any of some of these resources we've talked about too. So I'd ask you both as well as panelists, how do we change the way that our society views seniors and not just see them as vulnerable, or, you know, how do we improve quality of life above and beyond accessibility as well? How do we change that perception of seniors too, and the way that seniors are talked about?
Like Kevin, my grandmother was very much a part of my life. My dad was shipping out to war when I was born. My mother was in the workforce. My grandmother raised me. I think having a close relationship with a grandparent enables you to have a good idea what seniors can do and what they do. Many people don't have that experience. And I think there are ways of doing that. Intergenerational program, I think, is really important. I think it's important that in the senior center, some of the activities involve not just seniors, but people of all ages. And people get to know one another a little bit more that way. And the idea of aging, and it's not maybe as frightful, you know. I remember being 29, not really, but 29 and afraid of being 30, because 30 was this big jump, like, you know, you became old overnight. And but having intergenerational friends, being able to know people on all sides of life, I think is a wonderful thing. And I think we need to encourage that and facilitate that. And I think that would be a great help.
And Renee, I saw that you had a comment also about Accessoride that you wanted to add as well.
I just, if this is useful information at all, years ago, I ran an educational program for high school students. It was a contest, but one of the students said that the problem with Accessoride was the routes, that people would be waiting for a ride in Queens and the Accessoride would go to Staten Island and then the Bronx. And this high school kid came up with a program to fix that. So I mean, this was years ago, so I don't remember his name or anything. But you might want to look into some programmer who could fix at least that part of the problem. That's all.
That's a great point. Thanks for mentioning that too. I think that you're right. There's a lot of different ways that I think basic fixes to success, right? Even from a standpoint of technology and the routes taken to could be a significant improvement. So I'm glad you mentioned that point as well.
Well, I think the kid was saying that that's why the waits were just so unbearable that people didn't want to use it.
Yeah, I could completely see that too. And I think thanks for mentioning that, Renee, as well. And I think Cassandra also mentioned too, senior mentoring, writers, painters, relatives could be fulfilling. And I absolutely agree with that as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that comment too, Cassandra. Bill, I see we're running up on time over here, but the one thing that I wanted to, before we close out too, is, I see actually Amy has a good question that I want to make sure we can ask as well. A great question. Can you talk about what Asian seniors are experiencing in light of the anti-Asian racism and violence happening today? Kevin, do you want to speak to that a bit?
Sure. I actually was sort of waiting for a question like this to come up. And I'm sure there's other Asian American audience members here, and Shekar yourself as well. But, I think particularly it's definitely been alarming, and we've had calls to our location and our offices about violence that seniors has been facing. And what's crazy is that they actually don't report to the police or the authorities or proper authorities. That translates to maybe the lack of language, but it's also a very cultural thing, like culture of shame that we have as Koreans. There's this huge stigma around culture of shame, and we were taught that we shouldn't speak up in matters when it comes to these type of violences. But and it's very unfortunate. And I think these anti-Asian racism is nothing new, but it's just been more exacerbated and sort of highlighting over the course of time. And what we are trying to do, especially, is look, there are so many CBOs and faith-based organizations that are really doing whatever they can, working with the city as well on this. But the first thing is, maybe doing like a partner system where they're, guiding seniors to certain places and whatnot. We're trying to make ourselves more available, create hotlines for seniors, especially for seniors who need that sort of cultural sensitivity around, or cultural sensitivity around. So there's a lot of incidents that are not being reported because of this, because of individual like shame, or they don't know what to do, or simply they don't know what to do, to be honest. Like, how do I report this? Where do I start? So I think the very basic and the thing that I personally believe that we need to do is, number one, educating our communities, educating, and really the one-on-ones, right? Training the trainers, so that it really spreads throughout the city, especially, organizations or agencies that have direct access to, or that work with seniors, or, with a specific ethnic group, I think needs to be educated and continue these awareness raising campaigns around this. And not only that, but and then the second part is where the funding comes in, right? From the city. We need the money so that we're able to, we need to fund these Asian American orgs or whatnot, or agencies so we could do the work. And I think Amy just asked, are hate incidents really happening to Asian seniors? They are. And I can personally say that because we get calls to KCS, about XYZ instances. Obviously, sometimes they want to keep it anonymous at some point. Sometimes we actually help people. We have direct access to the Queen's DA's office. We have great relationships there. Their team is great. So we've actually referred to some of these clients to them and some of these seniors. So the reality is, yes, they are happening. It's just that these aren't properly being reported. And that's the problem. And that's disconnect sometimes. Sometimes what we don't see, we don't know, right? But I think it's happening in a micro level in neighborhoods. So, yeah.
And I think one of the points you made, Kevin, that's so important too is absolutely it's happening to Asian American seniors all over our city, all over the country too. And I just want to, emphasize the point you made about the importance of bystander or upstander intervention, because a lot of these incidents of hate and violence we've read, who are getting attacked on our trains, on our streets, with no one actually intervening to help. And there's so much. One of the most powerful classes I think many of us have taken to is on upstander intervention and how you can intervene in a way to stop and also protect someone from hate and violence, and do so in a way that is also calls attention to the issue, but also intervenes effectively and in a safe manner as well. But I'm glad you mentioned it, because I feel like that's a big part of the issue too, is to make sure that we are all, as we always say, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, and we see it that way, and we really stand up together too. So I'm glad you mentioned that point as well, Kevin, because it is such an important issue right now. And sadly, one that goes back, just as I always say, because the media is focusing on it now, doesn't mean that, this issue of anti-Asian racism and hate started now. It started way before the pandemic, for, decades, centuries before, because of the invisibilization of Asian American communities as well. But I'm glad you spoke to that too. And that's a great question from Amy as well. I am conscious of the time, so I want to be sensitive to that too. But I did think we had a really good discussion today too, and covered a lot of different issues. And I want to thank everyone who joined as well. And honestly say, these are all issues that we as a city have always faced, but now coming out of this pandemic have only been exacerbated from our seniors to all of our different communities. And I think that really focusing on fighting for our senior communities on all of these different issues, fighting against stigmas and perceptions that we need to change as well in our society about seniors is also part of this. And to be honest with you, I think is linked to the lack of services and resources that we want for our seniors in our neighborhoods and around New York City as well. It's the perception and stigma together that we have to also change, and as much as we do, demanding more from city government too. So I just want to thank everyone for joining. I also want to thank Kevin and Bill for joining us as panelists today and speaking on these issues, and for all the great work that you both do in our neighborhoods too. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you next week for our next conversation. Really appreciate it, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Millie. Thanks, everyone.
A great night.
Guys. Good night.
Bye.
Everyone. Bye.